Welcome to the Abundance Mindset, where we help make smart financial decisions seem a little bit more approachable.
Today's topic is on restricted stock units, or RSUs, and how taxes on your equity compensation can sneak up on you if you're not paying close attention. Specifically, we're talking about why underwithholding is really common for people who get RSU grants, the risks that this creates, and how to build smarter strategies to stay ahead of tax surprises and make your money work more efficiently. I will say there's nothing like logging into your W-2 when it's time for tax season and realizing that you're a millionaire on paper when you only thought you made, $200,000-$300,000 last year.
Yes, RSUs and equity comp in general are such a key turning point for people sometimes to engage professional help.
Totally.
And yeah, even something as simple as adjusting your withholdings, because that is a huge surprise for people who just think it's being done.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get into the details of that, but it's not. There's a default, and the default, if you are really well compensated, is not going to be enough. It's not free tax advice, but I would bet if we looked and you were holding the default and you're progressing in your career and getting a lot of equity compensation, it's kind of like, I made the joke right at the start of being a millionaire on paper. It's like, but that actually happens, right? Where if you're not paying attention to your equity comp and it's building, maybe your company has a great year, you could make way more money than you thought you would, and certainly more money than say in your bank account if you don't have a strategy for using that equity comp.
Yeah, and there's just a shock factor when people realize that their RSUs aren't being taxed the same as their salary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a perfect world that would be the case, but it's the IRS. They don't like to make anything that simple.
Yeah, and this is something, again, with your withholdings that you want to make sure is lined up in a way that you're ready for and it doesn't surprise you at the end of the year.
Okay, so before we get all into it, we'll just talk a little bit about the terms that we're going to use, so we're not just using jargon as we go. So we'll do a little bit of common sense.
So RSUs, restricted stock unit, it's a form of equity compensation, where you're granted company stock and it vests over time, and then it's taxed at ordinary income when vested. So this is the equity grant that you're getting. The vest date is when you have it, right? It's the date that the RSU or any form of equity comp becomes yours. In this case, for RSUs, it's the date that it's added to your ordinary income. Withholding, this is the amount of tax your employer or you or a CPA is taking out prior, right? So an employer might take it out of your paycheck or your bonus just to make sure that they cover your estimated tax bill. They might do this, they might not. But that said, that's what a withholding is. It's the amount withheld, right? Withheld for tax. Ordinary income tax, blah. The tax I hate the most. It's taxes on wages, on bonus, on your income, right? And vested RSUs. Supplemental wage tax rate. Not sure if you've heard of this, but essentially it's a flat withholding rate commonly used for RSUs. So currently the default for this rate is 22% federal tax for amounts that are under $1 million. That's important to know, especially if you are not in the 22% tax bracket. And then estimated payments, these are payments that additional payments you would make towards your tax bill, right, to the IRS throughout the year, especially if your withholdings are too low. You might make quarterly estimated tax payments.
Great. Tax. It's probably our favorite topic, in part because there's so much efficiency to be gained or lost with your tax strategy. So a lot of tax today, buckle up, but we'll try to make it approachable and actionable for you. So like we said, we're really centering on restricted stock units, or RSUs, today. We're going to talk a little bit about how they function and a bit about the pitfalls that people often fall into. Like Allison said, we actually get a lot of outreaches that are probably RSU driven. Or I shouldn't say probably, they are RSU driven. When we look at the tax return, that's what we see. But yeah, that's because RSUs, as we've said once or twice already, they're taxed at ordinary income when they vest. A lot of times your RSU grant is going to have quarterly, biannually, sometimes monthly vesting. So throughout the year, you're getting ordinary income added to your total income for the year. And what's extra tricky about this is you won't know exactly how much income your RSUs give you until they vest, right? So, Google stock, it was quite a bit higher in like December of last year, January of this year. fell down a bit. It's actually been kind of flat this year. But if you've got stock vesting monthly, which employees at Google typically have their RSUs vesting monthly, your income that's being spun out from that was higher in January for the vest, lower in March, really low in April, right? So this is something that you can't just project once and then assume that you're good for the year. So I don't think that people maybe fully appreciate how variable their restricted stock unit income can be, which is why for the people we work with, we've built systems to track RSU income accrual throughout the year and make sure that the tax projections that we're doing are as precise as they can be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So important. Your employer will withhold federal, state, FICA tax, but it's typically only at that supplemental wage rate
Mm-hmm.
for federal taxes. So when you're an individual for RSUs, that means that this federal withholding is often just 22%, right, from your employer, regardless of your actual marginal tax rate. And that's important for our clients who are often above that. They are in, the 32, 37% tax rate. So there's this mismatch that a lot of people don't even realize that they have.
Right.
And then they get really surprised at the end of the year when they owe a lot of tax because they didn't manage this throughout the year.
Right. So, I mean, like, think about it mathematically. So, we'll just even use simple numbers, but 22% say that you're actually earning up into the 37% federal tax bracket. That's a 15% mismatch. And typically, these people are getting a lot of RSUs in terms of income, like 2, 3, 400,000 plus. Let's just say it's 100,000 for easy math. That's $15,000 of tax liability just on 100,000 of RSUs that you have under withheld for. So this can really stack up quickly and lead to a big surprise if you aren't properly managing it.
Right. Or what if even just the stock goes up? If it's in the
Totally.
form, in that form of equity and your company does really well, these numbers can get, this tax liability can get really big really quickly if unmanaged, especially if you don't have any kind of diversification strategy or tax strategy or any of this in place. This is just poor mismanagement. And I think a lot of people know that. They just don't know what to do. They know I'm making a lot of money, I'm getting a lot of equity comp, but we'll just see what happens at the end of the year where they could be saving so much more money.
Yeah. And, sometimes, especially, we see this mindset sometimes in people that work in big tech where, the entire time they've been at Meta or Google or Microsoft, they've kind of seen the stock have a meteoric rise. And that's awesome. Like, this falls in the hashtag good problems category. But, two issues. I think one is the assumption that the stock is going to keep going up. I hope it does. I don't know if it will. Two, if you are chronically under withholding, you're going to start getting underpayment penalties. And what this means is basically the IRS doesn't give interest-free loans. So if they see on your tax return, because they look year over year over year, and if they see that you're chronically underpaying your taxes by a certain percentage, and there's formulas for all these things, they will start assessing penalties on the difference. Effectively saying, "Hey, we're essentially loaning you this money, right? That you aren't paying us back till April every year. So, say it's 30,000 under withholding. We're going to tack, they set the rate, but 7, 8%, I think is what it's around currently right now. I'd have to fact check that, but they set that charge on it, right? And then you get assessed that interest rate as a penalty on your underpayments for the year. So yeah, you'd better bet that your under withholding does better than your underpayment penalty. Otherwise, you're out even more money.
Yeah, not only are we not being efficient from a tax perspective, now we've got a potential underpayment penalty and just in general mismanagement of our equity comp when yeah, this is just one of those moments, guys, where you need to get your crap together.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we've looked at tax returns that people do themselves. We've also looked at tax returns that people do with CPAs that just aren't very proactive. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that pay underpayment penalties and don't know it.
Yeah, who work with a CPA.
Yeah. So
And I'm a huge fan of CPAs. Would never want to be one, but when we're fact checking and looking at tax returns, this might be you. So it's worth even just looking at your tax return and seeing, am I getting penalized in this way?
Okay, so that's the problem or the pitfall or several types of pitfalls people can easily fall into. But you aren't without tools in your toolbox. This is something that can be managed. So let's just talk about what people can do to effectively manage their tax liability? What tools do they have?
Right. You're making more money. You just want to be more efficient with the money you're making. So, first, if you're managing significant sums of equity compensation, work with a CPA. A CPA that is able to and skilled in the area of equity comp, or at least, can communicate with a financial advisor, right? That's kind of step one. As just some of these strategies are best implemented by a tax professional, not by yourself. And that's just the truth. That said, there's kind of three primary ways to manage deductions when you're a W-2 employee, right? So the first is your paycheck, through your paycheck. So you can often just adjust how much is withheld on your base salary through your W-4, right? So we were talking about, how do I adjust my withholdings? I don't want this mismatch. I want them to be managed. We typically would bring this up to clients, or if you have a really good CPA, they might bring it up. But you would even have to know to ask that question. So having someone point out like, hey, there's this mismatch. The first would be we could manage it through your paycheck, right? Your W-4. Some companies will allow you to elect a higher withholding percentage on the actual RSU when they vest, which is really nice, but many don't default to this. So again, you have to be really proactive, and employees don't realize that they have to ask or they have to be proactive. They just kind of think like, oh, my employer must be figuring this out for me. You need to make sure that you are being proactive and starting to manage this when you get into equity comp. Lastly, you can also make, if we can't manage it through employer platforms, portals, your W-4, we can then manage it outside with the CPA making quarterly payments, those estimated payments, so that, again, we're not getting at the end of the year, being surprised, one, from a tax perspective, and then two, potentially being subject to any kind of IRS underpayment penalties.
Yeah, the IRS wants to make sure you have no excuse. So if you can't manage it through your employer portal effectively, they'll kindly allow you to go onto their government websites and make payments yourself. So that always is like a backstop strategy, and not even a bad one. Like sometimes, you might not want your paycheck. I mean, maybe you've got 70% of your compensation coming from your RSUs, and you can't update your supplemental withholding. So you have a mismatch, and you also don't want to hobble your salary like way down just to, take care of your RSU withholding. In that case, you might get some good guidance from a CPA, maybe a CPA in collaboration with a financial planner, to actually manage that tax liability through estimated payments so that you're not hobbling your paycheck. And maybe your, financial planner helps you strategically use some of your RSUs to fund that tax liability and basically patch together an efficient strategy for managing liability throughout the year.
Right. We see this with the client. We'll say, hey, we see this mismatch. Because again, if they're on our proactive model, we're the ones being proactive about this, saying, hey, there's this mismatch. We need to make sure that we either check this with your employer, like your W-4, or we'll manage this with the CPA. And then we're emailing the CPA saying, hey, we need to make sure we avoid any underpayment penalties. We don't have a surprise at the end of the year from a tax perspective. And we're making this spin efficiently, right? And then you start to ask bigger questions, right? When you get into RSUs, like, okay, now even looking at my whole income, managing both my salary, any kind of bonus, these RSUs, like what is the actual tax liability at the end of the year? We might even start to make other moves, right? Or how
Mhm.
do we switch from our 401k? Maybe we adjust the percentage of pre-tax or Roth, or, there's these bigger questions, but this is just looking at the small, narrow, topic of RSUs and getting the right withholdings, but such big value with just that small but significant piece of strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been talking about RSUs a lot in this episode, and that is because it's an area that we're passionate about, and that we've actually developed quite a bit of expertise around helping people manage and optimize their equity comp. So, if your employer has granted you RSUs or another type of equity compensation, because there's a lot of them, you do have a lot to learn if you're going to manage this efficiently, or you want to work with somebody. So that's why at Abundance we actually made a free guide that outlines the tax wrappers, strategies, and pitfalls for 12 different types of equity compensation, RSUs included. And it is available for free for anybody who would like it. All you need to do is sign up for our newsletter to get a free download of that guide, which can really get you a kickstart on how you might want to think about managing the equity comp or multiple types perhaps of equity compensation that you've been granted, we'll put the link for the newsletter sign up in the show notes.
Yeah, and just sign up for the newsletter because it's free and there's a bunch of free, valuable education. I mean, if you're listening to our podcast and you like it, then sign up for the newsletter.
Yeah. Yeah. Simple as that. Okay. So, like we said, we've dealt with a lot of RSUs. We've got a lot of stories of how it's played out in real life, but let's tell just a couple stories of how it's worked really well when someone's been working with us and how someone started working with us because it wasn't working well. So let's start with how it can look. So we had a client recently whose technology startup was acquired by a larger tech company back in 2024. And as a part of the acquisition, the larger company gave away really big RSU grants to the new employees that were coming in. So our client was one of those new employees coming in and got a really big grant in, half one of 2024. The RSU grant didn't start vesting until that date in 2025. So, didn't have anything new to manage in 2024 beyond, all the things of shifting employers and 401ks and all that. But we knew that we had to look at 2025 and beyond, and also strategically think about 2024 as a lower income year, knowing that in 2025 there's going to be a significant RSU vest. Where we're talking several $100,000 because it was a really, really big, we'll say, like incentive to stay that the acquiring employer was offering. So lots to plan here. We found that the new employer, as happens in a lot of cases, our client had been set up at the 22% default withholding rate, but her and her husband were looking at probably the top end of the 35% tax bracket, maybe the 37% for their 2025 projected income. And moreover, this was one of the companies that doesn't have a great system / any system. They actually didn't allow this client to amend her supplemental wage withholding rate. So she had that 13 to 15% gap that we were talking about earlier in this episode that would create a really big liability for her if we weren't looking at this and being proactive. So fortunately, we have a relationship with the CPA that she works with, and actually have some systems set up with that CPA where we caught this. We corresponded between the three of us, found that her employer wouldn't let her update the supplemental withholding. Kind of got in that same situation where it was like, well, I don't want to, update my W-4 and basically get paid very little for my salary just to manage this, the tax liability from the several $100,000 I'm going to make this year from RSUs. So long story short, then ultimately we got to a plan where the CPA then did a projection for her and gave her estimated payments to make quarterly, and then made them on her behalf throughout the year. And then we came along and helped her figure out strategically, what do we want to do with this income? How do we want to appropriately diversify it? But I think that's a really good concrete and recent example of how these things can work together well. Not only did we avoid surprises, right, but we then had an opportunity to make everything work together really efficiently and have the flexibility for this client to leverage this to further her goals, which is great.
Yeah, so we're starting to get into how this specific, point in time when you start getting equity comp and managing it, then starts to impact more of your financial plan and then has larger impacts, and there's even bigger opportunities for you to save and be efficient. And so I think it's such a great conversation. But yeah, I think of another client on the flip side, she was under withholding, right? I think under withholding is something that, especially if you're making a lot of money, that you want to get keyed in on, because you don't want to pay an under penalty fee. You don't want to tip the IRS. And also you want to manage your tax liability. You don't want a surprise. And you also want to be able to make moves throughout the year and be proactive, right? And so our clients are paying us to be proactive and say, hey, we're seeing this, we're catching this. Okay, now we need to do this, we need to do this. And then it impacts this part of your financial plan. So we need to adjust this throughout the year, right? That's being proactive versus, oh, tax time, crap. I've got a situation. How do I just react and kind of manage and pull my life together for this year? But I lost the opportunity to make moves the entire year prior.
Right. Yeah. And we don't laugh at people's pain, but I'll note that it's not uncommon, particularly for our clients, if they haven't started engaging us proactively for planning, or sometimes just getting an outreach from somebody that we don't yet work with at all. But yeah, like April and May is a common time to get an outreach because nobody likes the feeling of having to pay 20, 30, 40, 50,000 that they didn't expect. And yeah, if you're a keen observer of your tax return, maybe also seeing that you have an underpayment penalty on top of that too. So yeah, again, we would prefer that people just engage us before that happens to them, but that's a common time that we get an outreach and start working more proactively with somebody.
Right. And if you're coming into a lot of income, wouldn't you want to look at deductions you might be able to soak up for the year and minimize that tax liability, right? If I'm getting all these RSUs, okay, my income's going up, can't really control it, great problems. But, what
Hmm.
if I could minimize that by, okay, this year, maybe I'll make a donor advised fund contribution because my financial planner, we set this up. Or maybe we'll look for pre-tax opportunities in my 401k if that makes sense. Or we'll hold off on our Roth conversion this year. Or,
Hmm.
I mean, the list is endless, right? We can't give you strategies until we know you. But knowing where you're at and being able to be proactive throughout the year allows you to then manage your entire financial plan.
So, what's the bottom line about RSUs and taxations? They're a fantastic wealth building tool. They really are, but they come with complexity, especially when it comes to taxes. So, in many cases, your employer's default withholding rate is not going to be enough, particularly as you start to make more money. If you have significant equity comp and you haven't had a tax professional look at your withholdings, you could be putting yourself in a risky or just really inefficient tax situation. So, if you really want to level up your efficiency with your equity comp, work with an advisor to develop a proactive plan that leverages your equity comp as opposed to reacts to your equity compensation. This is playing both offense and defense.
Yep. So if you've been burned by unexpected taxes on your RSUs or you just want to get ahead of this next year, reach out. We help clients design tax smart strategies around their equity comp.
We're actually, for a limited time, going to offer just a complimentary 15-minute consult. We'll put that in our show notes that you can go ahead and schedule yourself. Just a quick conversation, phone call to see if there might be efficiencies that would be worth talking to us more about. Feel free to grab that link in the show notes if it's something that you are interested in taking 15 more minutes to explore now that you've listened to this episode.